3rd grade. But it's true, you know, and in some ways as an adult, I'm like, I'm glad they told me that because it's important that I knew that. And there's no reason to hide that from you, right? But with all of that understanding and history of the meaning and the weight of college, at a PWI, not everybody's coming in the door with that experience or with the knowledge of that experience.
Yeah, I think it's a shared, like, even though Black people are not monolithic, there are certain shared dynamics where I think you don't have to explain why this is a big deal.
Aisha, thank you so much. This has been so much fun to walk down HBCU memory lane with you today.
Yes, this has been amazing.
Thanks again to Aisha Roscoe. You can hear her on NPR's Weekend Edition, and her book, HBCU Made, is out now. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR. Hey, Brittany.
Hey, Brittany.
Hey, Brittany.
Hey, Brittany. Ray Love Jr. calling in from LA. And what's on my mind this week that I would love to know your thoughts on is the rap beef going down between Megan Thee Stallion and Nicki Minaj. Is it time for the queen to give up her throne? What say you, Brittany?
Ray. I think this is a question that's been on all of America's minds this week. For those of you who don't know, last week, Megan Thee Stallion released a new single called Hiss, wherein she basically, without naming names, aired out a few people who had done her dirty over the past few years in this rap game and in her life. There was a lot in there, but this is the lyric that really got things heated. Now, if you didn't know, Megan's Law is a mandate that the public be notified about registered sex offenders. It has nothing to do with Megan Thee Stallion. And many see that lyric as a diss to Nicki Minaj's husband, Kenneth Petty, who failed to register in California as a sex offender and was sentenced to house arrest. In response, Nicki released a series of tweets and live videos, and she eventually released her own diss song called Bigfoot.
Listen up, Bigfoot.
So in the song, Nicki accuses Megan of lying and brings Megan's deceased mother into it. And on top of that, I don't think the song is that good. Now, this is something that I'm excited to talk about, but I thought this week we'd do something a little different and bring in an expert, a real expert to chat this out with me. So, to talk about this very pressing issue, we have invited storyteller, music industry veteran, Black music and culture critic, and professor at the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at NYU, Naima Cochran.
Hi, Brittany.
Hello, welcome. This beef between Nicki Minaj and Megan Thee Stallion, what do you think of all this?
Ray asked if it's time for the queen to relinquish her crown. When Nicki was in her ascent, because of the way the industry was structured at the time, she was in her lane by herself for so long. All of her predecessors were off the scene for various reasons, and whenever they would pop their heads up, Nicki was very quick to kind of diss them, play them, whatever. So I think maybe we're seeing a projection based on what being, you know, an elder stateswoman meant to her. And I think she just can't conceive that, like, boo-boo, you can still be you. Like, nobody can take away Nicki's feats, her accolades, her talent, or anything.
I like the way that you put this. It's not necessarily that Nicki, it's time for her to hang up her crown. She's kind of doing it to a certain degree herself, and the sad part is that she really doesn't have to. But I wonder, do you see a positive path forward to her? Do you see a way back to her former glory?
I don't know, and here is why I'll say I don't know. First of all, this isn't new for Nicki. She's been trending in this direction for quite some time. So, you know, her brand now is Mean Girl, right? What's happening to Nicki, to me, kind of a parallel what's happening to Kanye, which is like the antics for a little while, like everybody kind of let it go and laughed it off, in part because they were creating really strong art. But now the art is falling off. The quality of your art has to be equal to or superior to the antics. I think that she's going to have to come to some realizations within herself, right? Before it translates over to the business side. There really is room.
Well, Naima, all we can do is kind of see what happens, but I'm so glad that I got to talk this through with you.
Brittany, thank you so much for having me and let me share my thoughts on this.
Ray, there you have it. My thoughts and Naima's. Like I said, we're going to have to see how this all plays out, but till Monday, avoid bookings and the bars. Have a good weekend. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Martin Girdwood,
Alexis Williams, Liam McVeigh.
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by Jessica Plachek. Engineering support came from
Robert Rodriguez.
Gilly Moon. We had fact-checking help from Barclay Walsh. Our executive producer is Verlin Williams. Our VP of programming is Yolanda Sanguini. All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. From Cunard, sailing to over 250 destinations with Queen Mary II, Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, and Queen Anne. Each voyage is dedicated to a world of fine dining and entertainment. Cunard.com. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
Support comes from listeners like you and from Ohio Living Land Fair. You can schedule your tour of the 2-bedroom independent living apartment homes with underground parking garage. Your opportunity to say goodbye to yard work, cleaning, cooking, and home maintenance. Discover more online at ohioliving.org. That's ohioliving.org. Public radio isn't something you think about all the time, but the stories you hear do stick with you. And the Public Radio podcast are some of your favorites. And you do listen every day. WVXU is your station. Listeners like you keep it going strong. Please donate at WVXU.org. Thank you.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUB Oxford. News from Cincinnati Public Radio and NP.
Today on Code Switch, we're talking Taylor Swift, girlhood, and whiteness.
My good friends, she's this weird flashpoint where we're all on the same page about a lot of political questions, but then when I start to sort of like criticize Taylor Swift or sort of have my own opinions about some of like what I see as problematic, it's like very easy to alienate them.
Wade into some Swiftie waters.
There's not a lot of conflict in my social circles politically, except when Taylor Swift comes up.
Then, unlike it, well, you shouldn't ignore feelings of discomfort.
Sometimes you have to resort to avoiding it, being numb to it, but not for too long. If you put it in the cabinet, you need to come back and get it.
That's coming up on Code Switch and Life Kit from NPR.
After this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Nora Raw. The U.S. launched airstrikes yesterday, hitting 85 targets in Iraq and Syria, being used by militants supported by Iran. This was to retaliate for last weekend's drone attack on a base in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. service members. NPR's Jane Araf reports from Baghdad on Iraq's reaction to the strikes.
Well, there's a strong statement from the Prime Minister's spokesman saying, contrary to what the U.S. has said, it did not tell the Iraqi government in advance of the airstrikes. Bassem al-Awad called the strikes a blatant aggression, which puts Iraq and the region, quote, on the brink of abyss. And importantly, he says the presence of U.S.-led forces in Iraq is itself now a threat, which means even more pressure on U.S. troops to leave.
NPR's Jane Araf reporting from Baghdad. The British government is expressing support for the latest series of widespread U.S. strikes in Iraq and Syria. Bill Marks reports.
A spokesperson for the United Kingdom's government in London called the United States a quote, steadfast ally and said it strongly supported the American right to respond to dozens of targeted airstrikes. The spokesperson would not comment on the specifics of the operation, but said the UK had, quote, long condemned Iran's destabilizing activity throughout the region. The spokesperson also said the UK specifically condemned Iran's political, financial and military support to militant groups in reference to the links between Iran's Revolutionary Guard and the militia that launched the drone attack on a US base close to Syria's border with Jordan. For NPR News, I'm Bill Marks in London.
A new bill in the Senate aims to help thousands of veterans who are at risk of losing their homes. The move follows an investigation by NPR, as Quill Lawrence reports.
A pandemic-era VA program allowed veterans to pause loan payments. Then it ended abruptly, leaving thousands at risk of foreclosure, like Navy vet Karen Whitley was.
I feel like I've been scammed almost.
After NPR coverage last year, the VA paused foreclosures. Now, Montana Senator John Tester has co-sponsored a bill to help vets get current on their loans.
This will allow veterans to stay in their home, not be priced out of their home, and just basically fill the gap.
The gap until the VA fixes the problem later this year. VA Secretary Dennis McDonough says vets should be safe from foreclosure in the meantime.
If that is not the case, I urge our veterans to please be in touch with us so that we can address any questions or concerns or confusion.
Quill Lawrence, NPR News.
Democrats in South Carolina are voting today in the first official Democratic presidential primary. President Biden's campaign officials say he faces little competition for the party's nomination, but they hope for a strong showing. South Carolina was critical in winning the 2020 nomination. Republicans will hold their presidential primary in South Carolina on February 24th. This is NPR News. A 5.1 magnitude earthquake shook Oklahoma last night east of Oklahoma City. Local officials say no injuries were reported. Scientists know that climate change makes heat waves more intense and frequent and affects wildfires. New research shows the combined effects are making health risks even higher. NPR's Alejandra Barunda reports.
People's bodies go a little bit haywire when wildfire smoke thickens the air.
Wildfire smoke could affect human health while increasing the oxidative stress both in the pulmonary system and in the overall human body.
That's Chen Chen. She's a climate researcher at the University of California, San Diego. When it's really hot out, well, that also puts a lot of stress on the same parts of people's bodies.
So we think there's a possibility of compounding health risk from these two co-occurring climate hazards.
Chen led a new study in Science Advances that shows simultaneously hot and smoky days in California sent many more people to the hospital than either one alone. The health risks were much worse in low-income communities of color. Alejandra Barunda, NPR News.
Lawmakers in Northern Ireland chose a new First Minister today. Michelle O'Neill will be the first Irish nationalist to serve in that position. Her elevation became possible after British Unionists who want to remain in the United Kingdom ended their 2-year boycott of the government. Under the terms of the 1998 peace accord, power is to be shared between the two parties. One can't govern without the agreement of the other. I'm Nora Rahm, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Luminescence Foundation, dedicated to shedding light on neurological research focused on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases, and supporting land conservation initiatives, and the listeners who support this NPR station.
This week in This American Life, there are certain questions people use on dates that are witness tests, proxies, or other questions that people really want to know the answers to. A big one?
It's what do you think of Beyonce?
Yeah, I am aware of the Beyonce question.
Have you experienced this?
Yeah, I've experienced it many times.
Questions that contain other realer questions this week.
Saturday afternoons at 1 and Sunday nights at 10 on WVXU.
Hey everyone, you're listening to Code Switch, the show about race and identity from NPR. I'm B.A. Parker. Taylor Swift is having a moment. I mean, she's been having almost 2 decades of moments. She's been nominated for Grammys since she was 17, and this year, of course, was no exception. She's recently named Times Person of the Year. Her Eras concert tour grossed over $1 billion. The first concert tour to ever do that. I mean, even just the movie of the Eras tour attracted almost 5 million fans on opening weekend. Heck, USA Today even hired a Taylor Swift reporter. Swift is an American sweetheart. America has watched Taylor Swift grow up from the teenager with an acoustic guitar to the 34-year-old pop behemoth. all with her girlhood sort of enshrined. Taylor Swift, whether she likes it or not, represents a type of white girlhood that has become aspirational for many people. So then it begs the question, whose girlhood gets to be cherished or valued? I'm not here to answer these questions on my own. Joining me on the mic today is our very own version of a dedicated Taylor Swift reporter right here on the Code Switch team. Our senior editor, Leah Donnella, has been writing about Swift since 2016, but thinking about her for a lot longer. So welcome back to the show, Leah.
Thanks, Parker. Good to be here.
So, are you a Taylor Swift fan?
I never know quite how to answer that. I definitely pay attention to her, and there's plenty of her music that I like. I've seen all of her music videos, I think. But is that because I'm a fan? I'm not sure. You know, it's hard to ignore her cultural dominance, and she has the power to affect entire economies by which cities she decides to go to on her Eras tour. That's a huge crowd of Swift fans who didn't get tickets to her concert, just singing along outside of the stadium.
Good for them. If you like it, I love it.
It's sweet, right? And it feels like Swift has inspired this really kind of wholesome community in a lot of ways. But as with any person who holds a lot of power and influence, there are things about her and her persona that I think are in need of some serious dissection and critique, which I found myself kind of nervously admitting to a crowd of about 700 people, many of them diehard Swifties, in Bloomington, Indiana a few months ago.
Hi everyone. I am excited and very nervous to be the last presenter at this conference. I am not an academic, I'm not a scholar. I'm really sorry to say I'm not even a Swiftie, at least not in the traditional sense.
Did they say you need to leave? Hold up, okay, you're going to have to go back a little bit and set up the scene for us. What exactly is going on there?
Yeah, okay, so in November 2023, Indiana University hosted an event that was unlike anything I had ever been to before.
I'm a program coordinator at the Indiana University Arts and Humanities Council, and I'm so excited to welcome you to Taylor Swift the Conference Era.
That was Natalia Almanza, and she was one of the people who organized this big, multi-day academic conference all about Taylor Swift. She said that Taylor Swift was the soundtrack to her childhood and helped her understand how to process young adult life.
I'm sure most of us here have had similar moments where we felt that she wrote songs about us, our experiences in our lives. If you can't find a single Taylor Swift song that resonates with you, I just simply don't believe you. You're a liar.
And Parker, I haven't been to a lot of academic conferences, so I don't know what they're usually like.
Oh, I've been to a few. It's, usually in a hotel conference room. There are groups of academics who present their papers to about 3 other people who are in their field.
Okay, well, this was not that. It was in an old movie theater downtown with a big marquee outside that said Taylor Swift, the Conference Era, sold out. There were people actually lined up with tickets, waiting to get in like this was some sort of big premiere. Almost all women, most of them pretty young. And then as soon as you walked in the doors were these life-size cutouts of Taylor Swift from different stages of her career, her different eras. There were also snacks themed to the eras, like a lavender haze donut and Taylor cocktails at the bar next door.
Well, they were definitely committing to a theme.
Yes, and it wasn't just the people who were organizing the conference, it was also the attendees. Almost everyone there seemed to be dressed from a different Swiftian era. So you had your bright color sequins people, your stripy 70s style halter top people, the autumn core cardigan scarf cohort. I think I'm actually combining a couple eras there, sorry. And then tons of people wearing these homemade beaded friendship bracelets, which has become kind of a symbol of Swift's Eras tour.
Okay, Leah, I'm not going to make any assumptions here, but what were the racial demographics of this crowd?
It was mostly white. I think I noticed like 1 or 2 other black people, a handful of Latinas and Asian Americans, but just at a glance I'd say like predominantly white.
Okay, so in that way, it was a lot like a typical academic conference.
Very much so. And side note, not unlike Taylor Swift's fan base more broadly, a poll from Business Insider found that about 75% of self-proclaimed Taylor Swift fans are white, and a majority are women.
So what were all these people talking about?
So many things. About 30 people presented, so there was one woman from Harvard Law School who gave an amazing talk, actually, about whether Taylor Swift can copyright the aesthetic choices from each of her eras. Spoiler alert, no.
Because, to put it simply, you cannot copyright or trademark a vibe.
There was a talk about queer temporality in Swift's folklore era, timbrel nostalgia in her re-recordings, the blending of genres in Midnights, how she wields her cats on social media to extend her reach and fan base.
Importances of what media scholar Jessica Maddox calls the cute economy of the pet internet, which deploys the aesthetics of cuteness, fuzziness, and warmth to draw user creators into ultimately engagement.
Alright, so people were going deep into the mechanics of the Swiftum.
Really deep, yeah.
Okay, so Leah, why were you there? What is your extremely deep and nuanced Taylor expertise?
Well, thank you for asking, Parker, and I'll have you know that I was there because I was the closing keynote speaker. Hold your applause.
I know that's right.
And my talk was called Taylor Swift and the Politics of Growing Up. And it was kind of funny because I came in thinking I was going to say one set of things, but I wound up having to change my speech like every 10 minutes because this theme, Taylor's treatment of adolescence and girlhood, kept coming up over and over again, and so I really felt like I was learning on the spot. And one thing that I kept hearing people talk about is how Taylor Swift has really managed to tap into this kind of heartfelt, lyrical, nostalgic, sometimes cringy, but like totally familiar depiction of what it's like to be a teenage girl. Authentic and relatable are two words that came up a lot.
Well, it doesn't totally surprise me. I feel like for her entire career, Swift has been celebrated and at times also criticized for her focus on trying to capture the emotions of teens and young women.
Oh, absolutely. The conference was no anomaly in that way. New York Times Magazine wrote this big magazine article recently where the author suggested that you could understand the phenomenon of Taylor Swift, quote, through the eyes of the idea that Taylor Swift frees women to celebrate their girlhood.
That's a lot to put on Taylor Swift. But, okay, first for people who somehow haven't gotten sucked into the whole Swift universe, can we do, like, the quick backstory on Taylor Swift's actual girlhood?
Let's do it. So Swift is from a small town called Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half northwest of Philadelphia. It's about 85% white, pretty wealthy, and Swift has talked a bunch in interviews about how she didn't feel popular or cool growing up. But she says she did think of herself as hardworking and creative. She was really into music and obviously really wanted to be a songwriter. So when Swift was 14, she and her family moved to Nashville so she could pursue that passion. And it was just a couple years after that that her first album came out in 2006.
Okay, so that's around the time that I first encountered her, because I think Teardrops on My Guitar was one of the first songs of hers I remember listening to. And she was talking about this guy she had a crush on in high school, and I've totally been there.
Alright, on to Kealoha's Kitchen in Covington. 22 minutes from here. Hopefully I can find parking. Just saw Past Lives in the theater. AMC's got these like faves program that they just bring back like, old or recent movies that were released. Past Lives was really good. Realistic romance. Oh, man. That was a pretty unique story. Good ending, realistic ending. No cancer. Kind of life goes on kind of ending.
Turn left onto the I-75 South ramp. Continue for half a mile. In half a mile, merge onto I-75 South. The U.S. has begun its retaliation for a drone attack that killed 3 soldiers in the Middle East last weekend.
A massive rocket barrage hit more than 85 targets in Iraq and Syria yesterday.
I'm Alyssa Nadworny.
And I'm Scott Simon, and this is Up First from NPR News. The Biden administration says it's trying to deter future attacks while also avoiding escalating the conflict, but will it?
Meanwhile, anti-immigrant protesters gather this weekend at Eagle Pass, Texas.
It's the scene of a legal battle between the federal government and the Texas National Guard, which has cordoned off a city park.
They've basically taken over our property. This is our community. That's our park.
Stay with us. We've got the news you need to start your weekend.
Support for NPR and the following message come from USAFacts.org. How has the U.S. population grown? What does a $15 an hour wage buy? USA Facts has nonpartisan data to answer these big questions. Visit usafacts.org to learn more. This message comes from NPR sponsor Capital One, the Capital One Quicksilver Card. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Mattress Firm. To feel your best this winter season, you need quality sleep. To achieve quality sleep, you need the right mattress. Mattress Firm will find you the right bed with their wide selection of quality mattresses at every price. Plus, if you see a lower price, Mattress Firm will match it. The right mattress matters, and Mattress Firm will find yours. Thrive this winter by shopping the President's Day sale in-store or online at mattressfirm.com. Restrictions apply. See store or website for details.
U.S. missiles targeted Iran-backed forces that are thought to be behind attacks on U.S. bases.
The bombs fell on Syria and Iraq.
NPR's Jane Aref joins us from Baghdad. Jane, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Scott.
What do we know about the 85 targets the Pentagon says it attacked, some in Iraq?
Well, there were Iran-linked sites that were near the Iraq-Syria border. That's more than a couple of 100 miles from Baghdad. So not a huge reaction here, the way there would have been had they hit bigger cities. Almost all of them were related to members of the loose coalition of Iran-backed militias that calls itself the Resistance. The Iraqi government, of course, in a difficult position in between pressure from Iran-backed partners, to get rid of U.S. forces, and that fear that they'll be sucked into a war between Iran and the United States.
What did the strikes actually do?
They were focused on a strategic area in Iraq's western Al-Anbar province and across the border into Syria. Strategic because it's where Iran-backed militias and Iranian forces set up bases, both to counter a large ISIS presence there and to maintain a corridor between Iraq and Syria, whose government is allied with Iran. We reached the mayor of the city of Al-Qaim near the Syrian border, where many of the targets were. He spoke to us on a rather scratchy phone line. Turki Mohammed Khalaf, the mayor, says 21 people were taken to the Al-Qaim hospital for injuries sustained in the bombings. He says at least one civilian was killed and 3 injured. But he did say that since they were expecting the airstrikes, a lot of the residents had evacuated. An Iraqi government spokesman, Scott, says 16 fighters and civilians were killed in the strikes on the Iraqi side of the border, and about 25 more people injured.
And Jane, what reaction from the Iraqi government?
Well, there's a strong statement from the Prime Minister's spokesman saying, contrary to what the U.S. has said, it did not tell the Iraqi government in advance of the airstrikes. Bassem al-Awadi called the strikes a blatant aggression, which puts Iraq and the region, quote, on the brink of abyss. And importantly, he says the presence of U.S.-led forces in Iraq is itself now a threat, which means even more pressure on U.S. troops to leave. But, Scott, we have to remember this is not happening in isolation from the war in Gaza. This coalition of groups that calls itself the Islamic Resistance have intensified their attacks since that war between Israel and the militant Palestinian group Hamas began. The militia say they'll stop attacks when the Gaza war stops.
What happens now?
Well, everyone says they don't want a wider war, but there are so many flashpoints now in the region that the worry is, even if no one necessarily wants that wider conflict, continued large attacks and the demand to respond could have unintended consequences.
And here's Jane Aref in Baghdad. Jane, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Just hours before the announcement of the retaliatory strikes yesterday, President Biden traveled to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware.
The president joined the families of 3 U.S. soldiers who were killed last weekend as their remains arrived on U.S. soil.
NPR political correspondent Susan Davis joins us now. Sue, thanks for being with us. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
President Biden said in a statement, quote, "The United States does not seek conflict in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, but let all those who might seek to do us harm know this. If you harm an American, we will respond." So how do you walk that line between a retaliation that is a deterrent, but also doesn't set off a huge escalation?
Yeah, I mean, the administration is clearly trying to send a message that they do not want to see an escalation in the Middle East, and there is no indication that there's public support in the U.S. for that either. But as our national security team reported, this was the deadliest attack on American troops in the Middle East in about a decade, and that simply is not going to happen without a U.S. military response. All told, U.S. officials say there were 85 targets hit across 7 locations in Iraq and Syria, but notably, Alyssa, not in Iran, despite that being the nation that has trained and supported the very militia groups that targeted U.S. soldiers. So that's a pretty clear indication that Biden is trying to limit the escalation. There are Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill who would like to see him strike Iran, but there is reluctance to do that. I would note that administration spokesman John Kirby last night on a call with reporters said that the response began last night, but that, quote, it would not end tonight, so there obviously could be more coming.
And are there skeptics on both sides of the aisle about the president exceeding his war-making powers?
Sure. I mean, there is long simmering discontent on Capitol Hill from both the right and left that the president is continuing to use those 2001 and 2002 era war authorizations to justify these kind of strikes. But the reality is Congress has the power to repeal them, and they haven't because they don't have the majorities to do so. So until that happens, this president, like every president since George W. Bush, has the legal authority to conduct this exact type of military operation.
So the president was in Michigan on Thursday. I mean, Michigan has union members, black voters, white working class voters, American Muslims. That is a state that displays some of the political complexities that the president is going to confront this fall, right, in the election.
Oh, absolutely. And keep in mind this, Michigan is one of the 7 states that was decided by 3 points or less in 2020. Biden won it in 2020, but it's likely to be that close again, and Donald Trump's really competitive there. These are states that are won on the margin, so shifts within any number of those groups you mentioned is critical to the outcome. But Biden got a big lift this week. He was endorsed by the United Auto Workers. It's maybe not a shock that they're endorsing a Democratic president, but it's an indication of the kind of support he's building on the ground. Because it's not the endorsement itself that matters, it's what it carries, and that's money, voter mobilization, door-knocking campaigns, get-out-the-vote operations, all of those structural advantages that can make a really big difference in the closing weeks of a tight race. But to be clear, Biden has a lot of work to do in a state like Michigan. Donald Trump has a deep reservoir of support in the state, especially among white working class voters. He's won more labor support than past presidents, and frankly, he's been leading in many of the early polls in the states to date.
Let's turn now to tech executives. They got grilled on Capitol Hill on Wednesday for the effect of social media on children and young people. Are Mark Zuckerberg and other social media executives now in the same position as tobacco executives, kind of accused of marketing a product that they know is harmful?
You know, it's probably a fair comparison. This is an industry that has no friends in Washington right now. There's almost a public shaming of these executives, which is really rare to see of any industry. But this is an issue that connects with American families in a really visceral way. Anyone with school-age kids in their home is feeling the effects of social media in some capacity. But look, this is like the War Authority debate. Congress is not powerless here. They could play a role. They have the ability to pass laws and tougher regulations on this industry, and they've chosen not to. So senators were certainly channeling a bit of public rage this week, but unless and until they pass laws, it's still going to be up to these industries to essentially police themselves.
What is the latest on negotiations concerning legislation to secure the U.S.-Mexico border?
Well, they have a deal, but it's unclear if they have the votes. The deal was reached by Senators Chris Murphy, he's a Democrat from Connecticut, and James Lankford, a Republican from Oklahoma. They haven't released the terms of it yet, but the Senate's expected to vote on it this week. This is going to be a put-up-or-shut-up moment for Republicans. They've provoked this negotiation. They've made demands, and Democrats have ceded to a lot of those demands to secure the border, but Donald Trump doesn't like it. He doesn't think it's going to help him win. So his allies in Congress are going to have to make a call this week whether they want to try to fix a border problem that they say is a severe threat to national security, or keep the political fight going and try to win an election this November.
Wow, a lot going on. Thank you so much, NPR's Susan Davis.
No, you're very welcome.
A city park in Eagle Pass, Texas has become the center of a dispute over who controls the U.S.-Mexico border.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott says Texas does and has deployed the Texas National Guard to patrol the park and keep out federal agents.
Texas Public Radio's David Martin Davies joins us from Eagle Pass. David, thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Scott.
What does Eagle Pass look like?
Well, it's a border town, 150 miles southwest of San Antonio, overwhelmingly Mexican-American. Shelby Park is where the community gathered for festivals and soccer and softball. Now that park is off limits to the public. It's been militarized There are members of the Texas National Guard patrolling armored vehicles there. They're there because the park fronts about 2.5 miles up the Rio Grande. Governor Abbott has sealed the park off from the rest of the city with razor wire. And on the riverside, he's made a wall of steel cargo containers. The park has become a command center for the state's Operation Lone Star, a multi-billion-dollar anti-migration effort. The entrance of the park has now a patrol of well-armed members of the Texas National Guard, and they're keeping the U.S. Border Patrol out of the park, except they can still use the boat ramp that's in the park, but the Border Patrol agents are prevented from operating inside the park, so asylum-seeking migrants can't surrender to them right there.
David, what do some of the residents of Eagle Pass with whom you've been able to speak think about this dispute and the sudden attention in their community?
Well, they're not happy about it for a number of reasons. I've heard some say this attention and anti-migrant rhetoric makes them feel very unsafe. It's attracting a lot of anti-Biden protesters.
In half a mile, keep left to stay on I-75 South.
Jesse Fuentes lost his river outfitting business to the park takeover. He says Abbott has turned Shelby Park into a fort.
They've basically taken over our property. This is our community. That's our
Keep left to stay on I-75 South.
park. And look at that. I see tents. I see they're fortifying their
Continue on I-75 South for 4 miles.
tons of panels out there.
The fence panels that he's referring to are for adding more razor wire. The U.S. Supreme Court last week cleared the way for federal agents to be able to cut their state's razor wire. Governor Abbott, though, has so far signaled that he will defy that court ruling. And Fuentes told me the community wants their park back. This is a place families go for special events.
David, this dispute's been called a standoff between the Biden administration and the state of Texas. Is it, from what you've been able to see?
Well, there's been a lot of over-the-top language used to describe what's going on. The Border Patrol still has access to everywhere else on the Texas border, so it's not keeping them from protecting the southern border. And that's important because the migrants are not crossing here at Shelby Park in the large numbers that they were before the new year. But this is not a civil war or a battle. It's a dispute that's working its way through the courts, and that's happening now. It's largely symbolic and political. There are people on the right who want the TV cameras pointed at the border, and this does just that. But that's not stopping the claim that this is a big showdown over the border, and that's why this big convoy of pro-Trump, anti-illegal immigration activists are here this weekend.
Well, what do you know about the convoy? Who's taking part? What are their objectives?
Well, the organizers claim there are thousands of them. There are thousands of them here. I haven't seen that. Maybe there's hundreds. These are militia types, Christian nationalists, a mix of conspiracy theorists and election deniers. It's not clear what they're trying to achieve other than draw attention to themselves. And tomorrow, Governor Greg Abbott is having an event with 14 other Republican governors in Shelby Park. They claim Biden is deliberately not securing the border, and that gives them the constitutional authority to take matters into their own hands.
Texas Public Radio's David Martin Davies in Eagle Pass, Texas. David, thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much.
And that's Up First for Saturday, February 3rd, 2024. I'm Alyssa Nadworny.
And I'm Scott Simon.
Michael Radcliffe produced today's podcast with Andrew Craig and Gabe O'Connor.
Our editors include Jerry Holmes, Ed McNulty, Eric Westerveld, and Matthew Sherman.
Our director is Danny Hensel. Our technical director is Hannah Glovna. And we've had engineering support from Carly Strange, Nisha Highness, and Phil Edfors.
Evie Stone is our senior supervising editor. Sarah Lucy Oliver is our executive producer. And Steve Grubbin and Sierra Crawford are our deputy managing editors.
Tomorrow on Up First, a look behind NPR's beloved Tiny Desk series. Over the past 16 years, the series has introduced listeners to numerous emerging artists, as well as some well-established ones, like Taylor Swift and Alicia Keys.
Oh, I'd say they're established. And of course, for more news, interviews, books, music, and just plain fun, you can tune into Weekend Edition this very weekend. Find your NPR station at stations.it.
In half a mile, keep right to stay on I-75 South.
NPR.org.
Getting bogged down by how much new music there is out there? There's a lot. Consider a daily dose of the All Songs Considered podcast. It's the easiest way to get tuned into the music world. We spend hours combing through the new music universe, from emerging bands to time-tested icons.
Keep right to stay on I-75 South.
To bring you your next favorite artist. To get up on your music know-how, listen to All Songs Considered from NPR.
Continue on I-75 South for 1 mile.
Want all of NPR without relying on your radio? Visit npr.org to be connected to your local station wherever you are and wherever the news takes you. Get your vital mix of rigorously reported local and national stories, all live, free, and at your fingertips at npr.org. Want to hear this podcast without sponsor breaks? Amazon Prime members can listen to Up First sponsor-free through Amazon Music. Or you can also support NPR's vital journalism and get Up First Plus at plus.npr.org. That's plus.npr.org.
GNB Tech Minute gives you
In half a mile, take exit 192 toward Covington.
today's top tech headlines, from big names in Silicon Valley to the halls of power. If it's making news in tech, we've got it. Check out TNB Tech Minute in the Tech News Briefing.
Welcome to Kentucky.
Feed from the Wall Street Journal.
Hey, your money briefing. Take exit 192, then keep left at the fork.
Listeners, I'm Francesca Fontana from the Wall Street Journal. Every week, I write a column for the journal called The Score. It's a look at the biggest
Keep left at the fork.
stock moves of the week and the news that drove them. And now, every Saturday, we're bringing you what's news in markets. Let's get to it. This week, the stock market finished out the first month of 2024 higher, making January the third straight month of gains.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto Main Street.
Meanwhile, earnings season is in full swing, with this week's slate of reports including some of the biggest tech stocks. Don't worry, we'll come back to that in a minute. But first, I want to talk about General Motors. Now, GM had a bumpy year in 2023, but the company is aiming to leave all that behind this year, giving a surprisingly optimistic outlook for 2024. And that's thanks to a few things. One of those is that it's expecting narrower losses on its electric and driverless car businesses. And when I said that GM had a bumpy year last year, a lot of those bumps were related to those two areas. GM's budding EV business was tripped up by manufacturing issues that messed up launch plans of several models. For example, the botched release of an electric Chevrolet Blazer. And GM said that plans to spend about $1 billion less this year on its self-driving car unit called Cruise than it did last year. So those are some resolutions for GM in the new year. And investors seem to share in the optimism, as GM shares jumped nearly 8% Tuesday and held on to those gains throughout the week. We got earnings results from 5 of the Magnificent 7 this week. Those are the tech stocks that have been driving the market in recent months. So let's go chronologically. Alphabet and Microsoft's results came after the bell Tuesday, while Meta Platforms, Amazon...
Your destination is on the right.
Amazon and Apple were after the bell Thursday. So markets reacted very differently on the days that followed those earnings results. On Wednesday, we had Alphabet, Google's parent company, leading a retreat in tech shares after its quarterly advertising sales missed expectations. Its shares fell about 7%, making some smaller moves in the days that followed, but ultimately ending down. And even Microsoft went down with it, even though Microsoft actually reported its fastest earnings growth in over 2 years. Its shares lost about 3% Wednesday, but paired those losses throughout the rest of the week. But Thursday's earnings were the second chance for the other Magnificent 7 stocks to turn things around for tech. And they did. Meta, the owner of Facebook and Instagram, and Amazon both turned in strong results. Both stocks also jumped in after-hours trading, and Amazon moved steadily higher Friday. And Meta was real... Friday, actually, up some 20% during the trading day, thanks to the results and its new first ever dividend. Apple was left out of the party, though. It did beat expectations for iPhone revenue, but it seems like Wall Street was more focused on its falling sales in China. Apple stock fell after hours Thursday and was moving lower Friday. Now let's talk about Norfolk Southern. That's one of the biggest railroad companies in the U.S., and you might recognize the name from that train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio last year that released toxic chemicals into the community. And Norfolk Southern has become the target of a group of investors led by activists in Cora with the goal of overhauling its board and replacing its CEO. It seems like this investor group is focused on a number of different issues at Norfolk.
Head north toward West 5th Street.
And a big one is how the company handled that accident last year. Norfolk caught a lot of flack over it, and it also paid literally. The accident has cost the company over $1 billion, and its stock tanked and hasn't quite recovered. And the activist investors want to turn its performance around. Norfolk stock rose 9% Thursday on the news, its highest close in nearly a year, and it gave back some of those gains the next day.
Before we begin, a warning. This episode will discuss intimate sexual behavior. It turns out on the internet, a lot of people are talking about masturbation, more specifically about abstaining from masturbation. According to a study done by urologists in 2022, it's one of the most popular men's health-related topics on social media. They found the topic had
In 500 feet, turn right onto Philadelphia Street.
billion impressions on TikTok, over 1 million Instagram posts. But the thing is, none of the posts the researchers found came from actual doctors. And if you go searching for more information, you can very quickly find yourself in communities that are rife with medical misinformation, misogynistic posts. Communities that some researchers worry could be recruiting grounds for extremists. Today on Consider This, NPR
Take the next right onto Philadelphia Street.
Lisa Hagen is digging into this subculture, where it came from, and what everyone should know about it. She talks to NPR's Aisha Roscoe about what she learned about the phenomenon known as NoFap.
Hey Lisa. Hey Aisha. So, first things first, for our listeners who may not be on these
In 600 feet, turn left onto West 4th Street.
corners of the internet, and I didn't know about this, what is NoFap?
So the word fap is an onomatopoeia spawned on the internet, and it refers to the act of male masturbation. So in general, NoFap means no masturbating. But it's complicated. There's a company called NoFap, a Reddit forum called NoFap. More generally, it can refer to a whole cluster of online self-help communities where the purpose is to abstain from masturbation and pornography. This world also includes influencers and coaches, many of whom are charging money
At the light, turn left onto West 4th Street.
to help men suppress urges to self-pleasure.
That's the most beta thing you can do. That's the weakest thing any man can do.
Find yourself struggling with some urges, you just gotta give them the old come through slap.
So if you are about to dishonor yourself in front of the computer by watching some porn, remember that I am watching you.
Okay. That's a lot going on.
So I should say ideas about not ejaculating have been around for a long time. But this set of popular beliefs about abstinence is a specifically modern development that's framed as being based on science and self-improvement. It promotes the idea that pornography is addictive and that using it to masturbate causes a whole range of medical, psychological, and social problems. So what you'll see is that users in these communities suggest that if someone stops masturbating for 90 days, their brain supposedly reboots, like a computer, and then they can resume living a normal, fulfilled, usually heterosexual life. These abstinence forums suggest that all sorts of other benefits will also follow, like more confidence, more interest from women, and increased testosterone levels.
Okay, like, it's a very attractive concept, right? But
Keep right at the fork.
what's behind these ideas?
In 600 feet, merge onto I-71 North, I-75 North.
Keep left at the fork.
In masturbation abstinence communities, you'll see many people say they worry about what porn might be doing to human...
In a quarter mile, keep right. Follow signs for Pike Street, 12th Street.
relationships or psychology. And for what it's worth, the evidence is mixed on questions about who might be harmed by porn. Obviously, people can have a whole range of objections to pornography. Some are religious, others object to its sexist,
keep right,
or racist tropes, where they have strong beliefs about working conditions in the adult industry. It's a complicated issue. But when it comes to the more recent rise of these online masturbation abstinence,
keep left at the fork
communities, some extra context is helpful. These groups emerged around the same time as what's called the Manosphere, which is a collection of online spaces devoted to the...
In a quarter mile, merge onto I-71 North, I-75 North.
The idea that men are under threat because of things like feminism or modern life. And of course, this idea doesn't just exist online. A recent national survey found that 4 out of 10 Americans believe society has become, quote, too soft and feminine. Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson even did a whole special on this for Fox called The End of Men.
The decline of manhood, of virility, of physical health, all of which together threaten to doom our civilization.
So in masturbation abstinence groups, internet porn is often framed as a major factor in this supposed decline, and abstaining from masturbation is held up as the cure. One post I saw, for instance, a user said, "The future of Earth and Western civilization depends on men abstaining from masturbation." And definitely not all NoFappers are as serious as that. There are plenty of people just experimenting with this practice as a form of self-improvement.
In a quarter mile, keep left at the fork to continue on I-75 North. Follow signs for dating.
For instance, and I should say there is plenty of totally reasonable advice in these spaces, like eat better, exercise, get enough sleep, or, find a hobby.
But I guess, is it, when you...
Welcome to Ohio. Keep left at the fork to continue on I-75 North.
We're talking about masculinity and Western civilization and all this stuff.
Continue for 16 miles.
Who are these people in the NoFap universe?
From what we can see, most people in NoFap forums are men. One very early survey found that the NoFap subreddit was 95% men. You also see posts from users who say they're under 18.
And how big is this? Is this some small little tiny corner of the internet, or is this a whole lot of people?
Yeah, so the NoFap subreddit has 1 million+ users, and a 2022 study by urologists found that on TikTok there are more than 1 billion impressions on masturbation abstinence related topics, and over 1 million Instagram posts. The study also found that none of that content was created by doctors.
So this is kind of big, but NoFap did actually become a company, right? Who started it?
So it's this guy, Alexander Rhodes, who started the NoFap subreddit when he was a college student who spent a lot of time on the internet. Around 2011, he was on Reddit and he saw a study that's since been retracted over ethical concerns, but it claimed that men's testosterone levels increased after a week of not masturbating. I reached out to Rhodes multiple times to talk. He never accepted an interview request, but here he is on an Oregon radio show in 2012.
It was just a kind of a joke, and a lot of people were talking about, hey, let's see if this actually works, let's not masturbate for a week. And this was all occurring in the comments, and then really what's necessary, in my eyes, was just a place, a centralized location where everybody could kind of try this technique out.
So that's when Rhodes created the subreddit, along with a dedicated website, NoFap.com. And as it took off, he trademarked it and started a company that he says is a peer support group for people with problematic pornography use. To this day, NoFap says it is not anti-masturbation and it's not anti-porn.
So how does Rhodes and his corner of the internet get so much more popular?
So the year after starting the subreddit, Rhodes linked up with a guy named Gary Wilson. He's a former massage therapy instructor in Oregon, and he ran a website called yourbrainonporn.com. Wilson was not a doctor or a professor, but he did do a viral TEDx talk, and in it he argues that internet porn is a hazard for men's brains.
With internet porn, a guy can see more hot babes in 10 minutes than his ancestors could see in several lifetimes. The problem is he has a hunter-gatherer brain.
The video now has a warning from TED that several of Wilson's assertions aren't supported by medical or psychological research.
Carefully, the brain becomes associated with this porn harem.
This talk got 16 million views, and today the message of NoFap is strongly aligned with Wilson's arguments about pornography, which is that watching porn is addictive and causes things like erectile dysfunction, brain fog, or it can even change what you're sexually attracted to. Major media outlets then started running stories suggesting abstinence as a potential cure for pornography addiction, including the New York Times, CNN, the BBC, and NPR's Here and Now. Many of these features didn't include scientists or doctors, and they often focused solely on the founder of NoFap, Alexander Rhodes.
When we come back, we hear what it's actually like to be a part of this community.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, the Capital One Venture X Card. Earn unlimited 2x miles on everything you buy. Plus, get access to a $300 annual credit for bookings through Capital One Travel. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com.
The world is changing every hour, and catching up once or twice a day might not be enough. For quick updates throughout your day, there's the NPR News Now podcast. Every hour, on the hour, we bring you up to speed on the latest news from around the world in 5 minutes. Listen now to the NPR News Now podcast from NPR.
Listening to the news can feel like a journey. The 1A podcast is here to guide you beyond the headlines and cut through the noise. Listen to 1A, where we celebrate your freedom to listen by getting to the heart of the story together. Only from NPR.
We're back with Consider This with reporter Lisa Hagen. Lisa, you've been talking to people in masturbation abstinence communities. Can you tell me more about why is this message resonating with people and what brings them to these communities?
Yeah, a lot of these users are writing about loneliness or insecurity, sometimes a lack of sexual experience. All these things are pretty standard if you're a teenager, which, some of these users are. But I spoke to about half a dozen users and former users, and everyone said at first that there's a relief that comes with connecting with other people who are struggling with the same thing you're struggling with. One guy I talked to was named Tim. He's in his 60s. And he and everyone else we're featuring in the story from these communities didn't want us using their last names. They're concerned about people from their lives hearing about their relationships to masturbation and porn. Tim described his relationship with porn as pretty average. But at some point his wife came to him and said his porn use was destroying her self-esteem. And if he didn't stop, she would leave the marriage. So he tried, but he struggled. And for him, that was a sign that he had an addiction. And he says finding the NoFap community worked for him, which means he hasn't masturbated since October 2016 and is planning on continuing that streak indefinitely. He said masturbating again would be a threat to his sobriety and marriage.
So he doesn't plan on masturbating because he looked at it as an addiction. So, I guess he had a good experience with this. He feels like this has worked for him. But I understand you talked to some people who didn't have the best experience with this.
Yeah, so another guy I talked to named Derek, he's 24 years old, originally from Kentucky, and he grew up hearing in church that masturbation is a sin. He told me that he used to watch porn for a couple hours after school, and he was also struggling with erectile dysfunction. He felt terrible about that, but then he found NoFap forums.
I felt like I had found
all of my answers, pretty much, and it was like a weight off my shoulders for, for the time.
He told me instead of focusing on being a sinner, he now saw himself as an addict who's hooked on a product, porn, which is giving him erectile dysfunction. So he decided to try the 90-day reboot, no masturbation, 90 days, but could not make it that long, and it made him feel awful.
Every single time that I would fail, it was just a constant loop of, oh, we're doing so well, and then, oh, I messed up. And it was just, I would beat myself up throughout the entire process.
He doesn't go on NoFap forums anymore, and he feels comfortable with the amount of porn he watches. And when he looks back, he says he wishes he hadn't spent so much time in high school stressed out over this stuff.
I guess, but what does science say about this? Are there actual medical benefits to abstaining from masturbation or porn? Like, does it keep your testosterone in your body if you don't masturbate?
Right, it has a logic to it. But I talked to a urologist who's familiar with, and I should say publicly critical of the NoFap world, Dr. Ashley Winter, and she basically told me no.
I have seen claims on social media saying that semen retention can boost your testosterone levels, cure erectile dysfunction, make you more manly, make you stronger, cure depression, make you more successful, clear your skin. There is no medical evidence that it does any of those things.
To be clear, NoFap.com doesn't say all these things. Winter is referring to what she's noticed on various forums. Anecdotally, I've seen posts in masturbation abstinence communities where people believe these effects are real. I put out a lot of requests to talk to people in these groups and didn't hear back from most. But what I've been hearing from a lot of researchers who study sexuality and psychology are some really serious concerns about whether NoFap style abstinence could be exacerbating anxiety and depression, unlike the confidence boost that's being suggested.
Because if you can't maintain that strict abstinence, that's going to make you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
So you also talk to men who were concerned while they were interacting with these NoFap groups that they were addicted to porn. But then it sounds like some of them are changing their minds about that afterwards. I guess my question is, how do you know if you're addicted to porn? Are there guidelines? Can you be addicted to porn?
Yeah, I think the answer on this really depends on what you mean by addiction. A lot of people on NoFap forums believe they have serious problems with porn and masturbation, but there actually is no official porn addiction diagnosis in the U.S. It was considered and rejected by the psychiatrists who compiled the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. I spoke with one of the lead doctors on that committee, and he told me ultimately they couldn't decide on a specific point at which the really wide range of normal human sexual behavior officially becomes abnormal. Internationally speaking, the World Health Organization did approve a condition called compulsive sexual behavior disorder. That entry is really specific about how it's not something you should be diagnosing in adolescence or because of moral judgments about masturbation. Like, to qualify as a disorder, we're talking about sexual behavior that gets in the way of, like, health, hygiene, responsibilities over 6 months or more.
Okay, but it sounds like a lot of the men that you talk to still at some point felt like they were out of control. Like, why did they feel that way?
What's going on is that people's feelings about porn play a really big role. Some surveys on men seeking treatment for porn addiction have found that they often have much lighter porn habits than men who masturbate a lot more and feel fine. One example found that among people who say they are porn addicts, the average frequency of porn use is less than 10 times a year. I talked to Joshua Grubbs, who researches addiction and psychology at the University of New Mexico. He was actually raised to be devoutly evangelical and Christian conservative, and he got his bachelor's degree from Liberty University, which was founded by televangelist Jerry Falwell. That's where he remembers hearing a lot about pornography addiction.
And I remember there was even this speaker who had cited the statistics from a recent survey that some company had done that showed that 50% of all Christian men were addicted to pornography. And I remember being 18, 19 myself at the time and thinking, something about that doesn't make sense.
So later, when he became a researcher, he started studying these ideas more seriously, and he kept finding this one thing over and over again.
We would basically ask people, do you think that viewing pornography is morally wrong? Does it trouble your conscience? Do you think this is a bad thing to do? And if they said yes, but we're still using, they were just dramatically more likely to say that they must have an addiction.
So if they feel like there is a problem with viewing porn, then that's when they start saying, I'm an addict, I'm addicted. And is that the same for people who are very religious as well as those that are not religious?
Yeah, this applies to people regardless of where they stand religiously. Grubbs, by the way, says none of this means we should ignore someone who's troubled by their porn use. He says more than 1 in 10 American men probably have some level of concern about this. And there are many researchers working on finding evidence for what might be the right response. There's evidence that cognitive behavioral therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy can be very helpful. But Grubbs says the stuff dominating internet abstinence forums and influencer videos, it's not that.
Abstaining from masturbation is not a reasonable or, in my opinion, ethical treatment goal.
It's a model he says sets people up for failure. Grubbs says wanting to view less porn is a reasonable goal, but porn addiction recovery has become an industry.
Okay, yeah, because we heard earlier, all of those influencers, how much money is there to be made promoting masturbation and porn abstinence?
Let's take the NoFap accountability website, for example. It offers accountability groups over the phone for anywhere from $20 to $120 a month. NoFap.com, by the way, doesn't claim to be a source of therapy or medical care, and there are therapists who feel masturbation abstinence groups are unproblematic. But other influencers offer personal coaching or subscription content. There are rehab centers and retreats that offer pornography addiction recovery programs for like tens of thousands of dollars. Grubbs is a licensed therapist, so he's not suggesting that trained professionals should work for free.
But I do think that anytime that we take money from clients, we need to be sure that we're providing evidence-based care and care that helps and not harms.
If someone is looking for a therapist, a place to start would be with someone with a certification from ASECT, the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists.
When we come back, masturbation, abstinence, misogyny, and the Proud Boys. The news can feel incredibly overwhelming. For a breath of much-needed fresh air, head to NPR.org's culture section. From the buzzy movies, Tiny Desk, and artists that everyone seems to know about, type in NPR.org for the latest and greatest in the pop culture universe.
Hi, it's Terry Gross, the host of Fresh Air. We bring you in-depth, long-form interviews with actors, directors, musicians, authors, journalists, and more. Listen to our Peabody Award-winning Fresh Air podcast from WHYY and NPR.
We're back with Consider This. So we've talked a lot about like how the ideas in masturbation abstinence communities can be damaging to someone's mental health or even their pocketbook. But are there other harms that you've heard about?
Yeah, another big issue is that these masturbation abstinence spaces tend to contain a lot of anger toward women. I spoke with Kelsey Burke. She's a sociologist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the author of the book Pornography Wars. She says in some masturbation abstinence communities, the leap from what seems to be self-help to more extreme misogynist messages is not very big.
Undergirding arguments about porn addiction is that the sex industry, which is made up of mostly, women who are sex workers, that they are the source of temptation and that they are frankly ruining men's lives.
All of the NoFap users I communicated with talked about misogynist posts in these forums. The NoFap organization itself has stated rules against this kind of stuff. They say they try to moderate their forums, but I saw plenty of posts like this during the months I've been reporting on these communities. And, there are young teenagers in these spaces.
Yeah, I mean, that is, it's scary because your kids get online and you try to monitor what they're looking at, and you also try to tell them, just because people get online and say stuff don't mean you have to take everything to heart, but kids are impressionable. So these things can be very influential. Aside from the misogynistic language, like, what else are users encountering in these online forums?
So for people who monitor these spaces, another big worry is that it's potentially a recruiting ground for extremists. I mentioned the anti-feminist manosphere earlier. That sociologist, Kelsey Burke, told me that masturbation abstinence has been appealing to various kinds of extremists for a long time.
We have historical evidence that white supremacist groups from 100 years ago were instructing men that they shouldn't masturbate in order to sort of maintain their virility and strength.
To be super clear, some white supremacists have ideas about not masturbating, but we are not saying that everyone who abstains from masturbation is a white supremacist. Now, today, the Proud Boys have a rule against masturbating, and the NoFap founder, Alexander Rhodes, did do a guest appearance on a talk show in 2016 hosted by the future head of the Proud Boys, Gavin McInnes. And McInnes gave NoFap a huge shout out.
Guys out there, go to nofap.com. If you have a problem with porn, check out Alexander's program and participate in it.
Rhodes has said that at the time he only knew McInnes as a comedian and co-founder of Vice Media. Rhodes has strongly denied any ties with extremist groups, and he's sued critics who've alleged that NoFap, the company, has worked with or supported them. And Burke, that sociologist you heard a minute ago, says it's not accurate to say that being in masturbation abstinence groups leads people to extremism. But she worries about people who may be socially and emotionally vulnerable, finding themselves in groups like NoFap and then ending up somewhere else. Like, for instance, Gary Wilson, who did that TED Talk about porn addiction. White nationalist David Duke recommended that same talk on his blog, where he makes unfounded anti-Semitic claims that pornography is a Jewish plot to undermine white men. And ideas like that do migrate onto the forums. I talked to another former user of NoFap.com, Chuck. He's a 39-year-old in Colorado.
On the message board, there would be people, saying that, the Jews are, controlling the porn because they're having black men have sex with white women, and that's going to deplete the white race.
I haven't seen that specific post, but I have seen recurring conspiracy theories on both the subreddit and NoFap website forums. Some posts are explicitly anti-Semitic, others use vaguer language about a global elite or Illuminati, but these are narratives that echo the worldviews in some extremist spaces.
Okay, so these people are aware of each other and this idea. It seems like there are so many people who are involved in these conversations about NoFap on the internet. Why does it seem like there is relatively little scrutiny of NoFap theories?
Yeah, reporting on these communities can be hard. I spoke to researchers, I looked into reporting by other journalists and court documents, and what I found was that some supporters of masturbation abstinence have harassed critics by calling employers. targeting them with misogynist or anti-Semitic slurs or even violent threats. Academics have told me that all of this makes for a chilling effect on people wanting to do more research in the area. NoFap founder Alexander Rhodes has used a different approach with critics. He sued and threatened to sue scientists and media outlets. He sued his own mom. And all this legal action followed people's attempts to draw attention to overlaps between Rhodes' community and the extreme right. We haven't found any evidence that Rhodes has worked with these groups, threatened anyone, or done anything illegal. And I should say the NoFap website says it supports scientific research, and Rhodes' attorney once characterized him as open and receptive of honest and fair criticism.
So you did mention a lot of kids might be on these forums. Is there anything that we as parents can do about this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how likely it is that your kid is going to say, hey, Mom, I have a porn addiction and I'm on Reddit trying to not masturbate about it. But I think generally speaking, you know, frank conversations about sex, pornography, and the internet are really important. And that can be hard to deal with as a parent. But there are resources for that. And I guess as a closing thought, I think we as journalists should take the opportunity to look at communities like this more closely. I think when large media outlets, including our own, report on these ideas and the people involved in them, it's important to put them in context and fact-check the claims they make. And you know, these ideas we're talking about, people in power have heard them. More than a dozen states have passed resolutions declaring pornography to be a public health issue, using a lot of the same language and reasoning that you hear in the masturbation abstinence universe. So it's probably time for journalists like us to revisit some of these beliefs now that we have more information.
Well, thank you so much for your reporting, Lisa.
Thanks for having me, Aisha.
That was NPR reporter Lisa Hagen speaking with NPR's Aisha Roscoe. Read more from Lisa's reporting at the link in the episode notes. This episode was produced by Ariana Lee. It was edited by Brett Neely and Jenny Schmidt, with help from Liana Simstrom and Irene Noguchi. It was engineered by Valentina Rodriguez-Sanchez. Music contributed by Ramteen Arablouh. Our executive producer is Sammy Yennigan. It's Consider This from NPR. I'm Scott Detroit.
News is a public service. That's why NPR never puts a paywall in front of our journalism. NPR.org, our free website, promises to stay that way so that you get all of it. Breaking news, pop culture, award-winning journalism, wherever you are. To stay connected, head to npr.org.
On the StoryCorps podcast, we believe a lot of the most interesting stories are right there in front of us, waiting to be told. So every week, we share a candid, unscripted conversation between two people around the themes of love, loss, family, and friendship. These aren't experts or celebrities, just everyday people like you and me. Listen now to the StoryCorps podcast from NPR.
How can a story feel uniquely Latin American and universal? You'll have to listen to Radio Ambulante, NPR's award-winning Spanish-language podcast, to find out. For over a decade, we've told stories of love and migration, youth and politics, the environment, food, and families from everywhere Spanish is spoken. Escucha ahora el podcast Radio Ambulante desde NPR.
Welcome back to more bonkers Reddit stories. I'm Shane, and we are joined today by Angela, and a very special guest, Sabrina Breyer, is here with us. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here. And I'm ready to really, for us all to really sink our teeth in to this. So
yeah, for sure.
I'm absolutely ready.
A lot of people here at Smosh are big fans of yours.
Huge. That's so nice. And I love Smosh.
Oh, thank you.
Huge.
That's so nice of you to say. Are you familiar with Reddit at all?
Yes.
Okay.
Do I have to I'm just going to say yes.
You don't have to explain anything.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yes.
So we have a little bit of a theme today. It's kind of around friend drama. A little bit. It orbits that sphere. So, all right, here we go. First story. Am I the asshole for refusing to call my friend's baby by his first name when she named him after my ex? Right off the bat, what are we thinking on that one?
Wait. Oh my God! Because I think there's an important distinction here. Was the axe? Did that happen to be the name?
I know
that they always dreamt of.
Okay.
Or was it really like?
Life doesn't come with an instruction manual, but the Life Kit podcast gets you pretty close. Whether we're helping you tackle life-altering questions or just your everyday pickles, we've got deeply human solutions to your deeply human problems. Listen now to the Life Kit podcast from NPR.
Hi, this is Sam from Tucson, Arizona. I'm not skiing in a state park, climbing a mountain, or training for a marathon. I'm in the same place I am every day, sitting in front of my computer, working on my dissertation. This podcast was recorded at
1:09 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, February 2nd of 2024.
Things may have changed by the time you hear this, but I will hopefully be one day closer to finally finishing grad school. Enjoy the show.
Sam's my kind of guy. As I sit here in front of my computer.
Yeah, I love it. Well, hey there, it's the NPR Politics Podcast. I'm Asma Khalid. I cover the White House.
I'm Susan Davis. I cover politics.
And I'm Don Gagne. I cover the presidential election.
Well, since it is Friday, we have got our weekly wrap, and there is lots to discuss, but we are going to begin the show with a deep dive on unions, their political influence, and why both parties are vying for their votes. And Don, I want to start the conversation with you because you have long covered Michigan politics, you have long covered labor politics, and you are based in Detroit. We saw President Biden recently secure the endorsement of the United Auto Workers, and he was in fact in your state of Michigan yesterday meeting with union members. What stood out to you from the president's trip?
Well, it comes just over a week after he got that big UAW endorsement, and that's a very important endorsement for him to get. This visit, though, here's what struck me. It was small, even low key. There were no big events. There was no big rally with union members. It felt like it was like just his presence that was the important thing there. And then later on, before he headed back to D.C., there was a stop at a local restaurant in Macomb County, and this was just for kind of smaller, more intimate conversations with some UAW members. Yeah, UAW President Shawn Fain was with him the whole time and was kind of his guide. There were two things that really stuck out to me. One, it kind of felt like they were gathering footage for TV commercials to show Biden with, in intimate settings, right? But the other thing is, it felt like he was just like collecting more points. It's like, oh, that's Joe. He's here all the time. We saw him on the picket line this summer, and we endorsed him in Washington last week, and now he's here. That's just Joe. He's always around.
Don, I'm curious about the energy right now in the labor movement, because the movement broadly, but the UAW specifically, has had some actual wins lately. It seems like the labor movement is more energized than it has been in the past, and I wonder if you can feel that in sort of the room or in the organization of the people you talk to that are part of these unions.
I think that's absolutely the case, but I mostly think it is the case with the UAW because the UAW's particular set of circumstances. They got a new president just about a year ago, Shawn Fain. He led them through a long and successful, keyword there, successful strike against the Detroit 3 automakers. And these auto workers got the best contract they have gotten in decades. Big raises, more job security, eliminating some of those tiers that paid some people less for doing the same job. That was a big victory, and it was kind of an unexpected victory. And now Fain is using what you can only call grassroots support for him among his rank and file, among his membership, to endorse President Biden. And the question will be if that does then drive more union votes, more UAW votes for Biden than he would typically get.
Don, that actually leads me to the big question I've had in my mind, which is how much does an endorsement from the United Auto Workers really mean? And I ask that because I think back to the 2016 election Hillary Clinton was running on the Democratic ticket. She got the UAW endorsement. Ultimately, she did not win enough union voters, and ultimately she lost the state of Michigan and lost the presidency.
Right. Here's the thing with the union vote. It is not this lockstep block of votes that the union leadership delivers with an endorsement, right? In a good year, let's just say even in a normal year, about 58%, somewhere in that range, of union households in the country. Again, we're talking union households broadly, not just the UAW here. But something shy of 60% would vote for the Democrats. And that is typically, not always, but typically where the union endorsement goes as well. But the rub for the unions is whether or not they are able to actually deliver that. And if a candidate like Hillary Clinton only manages to get 51-52% of the union vote in 2016 against Donald Trump, that can be enough to cost her in close battleground states like Michigan, as it did that year.
I think we have to put in a ton of caveats when we talk about 2016 and Hillary Clinton and the UAW. Democrats are still finger pointing over what went wrong in Michigan that year. But part of what the Clinton campaign did wrong was they messed up union relations. They famously did not engage with unions on the ground in the way that was typical of the campaign. The Clinton campaign, I think, in many ways took the union vote for granted.
Hillary Clinton did not campaign as much in Michigan.
I don't think she ever did a UAW event in 2016. Like, they thought they had Michigan and locked down. It was a safe blue ball state, and it wasn't. The Biden campaign, knowing right now, I don't think they're taking Michigan for granted. I don't, Joe Biden has already done several UAW events. I think that they see the union as critical to victory there. Michigan is one of the 7 states that was decided by 3 percentage points or less in 2020. It's probably going to be that way again, and states like this are one on the margins. And in a state like Michigan, the union vote can be decisive. And let's remember, it's not just about the union vote. Unions have money, they have organization, they have get out the vote operations. They don't just turn out the union vote, they help turn out the vote. I think it especially matters when you're up against a party that is led by someone who continues to throw doubt about the electoral system, about the safety of the vote, things like mail-in voting, downplaying voters to do that. When the unions right now focus a lot of efforts on doing things like getting people to vote early, vote by mail, and show up and vote. So the structural advantage that I think a big union endorsement in a state like this is still a very big deal.
Because we've seen Biden make this point repeatedly and deliberately that he is not going to assume that the union vote is necessarily this. He's really trying to work for it. On the flip side, what do we see the former president Donald Trump doing? I know that he met with the Teamsters Union in Washington, D.C. this week. This is, of course, the largest union in the country. Does he have a chance at winning their endorsement?
It certainly feels like it would be a long shot for Donald Trump to win the Teamsters endorsement. And again, look, this is a union that has endorsed Republicans famously in its career. They endorsed Richard Nixon. They endorsed Ronald Reagan twice. But they endorsed Joe Biden, and before that, they endorsed Hillary Clinton. The Teamsters of today have been more in the fold with the labor movement writ large in terms of their endorsements, in terms of their approach to policy. That said, they too have a relatively new president, Sean O'Brien, and he sees it as in the union's interest to be bringing in all of these candidates, having conversations with them, and I suspect, based on what I'm hearing and how I'm hearing these meetings described, Sean O'Brien is doing much more talking at these meetings with candidates than the candidates themselves. He is using this as an opportunity to make sure they understand, the candidates understand, or at the very least that the candidates hear what issues are important to the unions and why. And there are plenty of issues where they are going to be at odds with Donald Trump.
All right, Don, thank you so much for sharing your reporting with us. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
All right, we are going to let you go, and we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll talk about the conspiracy theories surrounding Taylor Swift and the presidential election.
The news can be disorienting, and it can be really hard to remember how we got here. That's why we started the Throughline podcast. Every week, we take you on a cinematic trip into the past to better understand the present. Listen now to the Throughline podcast from NPR.
In need of a good read or just want to keep up with the books everyone's talking about? NPR's Book of the Day podcast gives you today's very best writing in a pocket-sized show. Whether you're looking to engage with the big questions of our times or temporarily escape from them, we've got an author who'll speak to you. Catch today's great books in 15 minutes or less on the Book of the Day podcast, only from NPR. Know that fizzy feeling you get when you read something really good, watch the movie everyone's been talking about, or catch the show the internet can't get over? At the Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast, we chase that feeling 5 times a week. We talk about the buzziest movies, TV, music, books, and more. From lowbrow to highbrow to in between. Catch the Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast from NPR.
The world of podcasts can feel overwhelming. We'll let you in on the easiest way to find your next favorite show. Head to npr.org/podcast. From politics to pop culture to music and everything in between, you'll find a selection of shows that'll make you a super fan in no time.
And welcome back. And we're joined now by NPR's Shannon Bond, who covers disinformation and democracy. And Shannon, it is wonderful to have you with us.
I'm glad to be here to talk about this topic particularly.
I know.
You always know the conversation's going to get weird when Shannon's on the podcast. So
I know. I'm sorry, guys, but I like to bring the weird.
Shannon, I'm glad that you are here with us because I think we all need to sit and try to make sense of what transpired this week. So the basics, for folks who have not been following the story, is that the pop mega superstar Taylor Swift has been, of course, making a lot of headlines for her music or film all year. And, of course, she's been making a lot of headlines for her romance with Kansas City Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce. But this week, she became the center of some wild conspiracy theories. Shannon, why don't we begin there for folks who have not been following the news or maybe paying attention to the corners of the internet? What are the claims being made about Taylor Swift?
I'm very envious of people who have not had to encounter this. But so here it goes. So the idea here is that Taylor Swift is part of a Democratic plot to re-elect President Biden, and that this involves the NFL rigging the season, and specifically rigging the Super Bowl, so that the Chiefs win. We know Taylor has been going to Chiefs